Welcome, Ava, to the podcast. I am so excited to talk with you today for multiple reasons. One of which, I've been following you for a while, and you've been such an inspiration content-wise on Instagram because you're growing all the time and you're just doing amazing things and you're so young. So I've loved following your page and how much you're inspiring people to change the way they view food, especially as a teenager, which is just such a powerful platform that you have. And then also that you talk about homeschooling, which I love because so many people who are homeschooled and have Instagram pages, it's usually like this thing they talk about maybe every once in a while, but you have really made an effort to, I don't know, talk about your homeschooling experience and encourage people to pursue homeschooling, which I have absolutely loved. So thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your kind words. I am so happy, to be of help of anyone who's interested
Yeah.
in, clean eating and homeschool. And I totally agree what you were saying about how, a lot of people kinda brush homeschooling to the side if they're homeschooled and, a content creator,
Mhm.
because I feel like it's, kind of something that a lot of people are embarrassed about, but they really shouldn't be. It should be talked about and normalized.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is kind of pushed to the side and they mention it maybe every once in a while, but it is something that is so cool. And what has given you the confidence to kind of talk about it more?
Yeah, I, have not really ever cared about what people
Mm,
thought about me or my situation or anything, so I was never, scared to start talking about homeschooling, but I just think it lately, especially after COVID, it has become such a more, well-known thing. Yeah, but I just, really wanted people to start realizing that homeschool is, like, a real form of school,
mhm.
if not harder than a lot of public schools around here. I'm not saying all public schools, but my public school is, definitely not as hard as my homeschool program is, which is kind of gets frustrating to me because a lot of people see homeschool as this fake form of school or my mom's just teaching me random things that she found on the internet.
Mhm.
And that's couldn't be further from the truth. So I just kind of wanted to start normalizing homeschool and bringing awareness to the fact that it is a real form of school.
Yeah, that has been one of my main things too, as well as how can we make homeschooling be seen as a real valid alternative for education, but a really cool alternative and a very powerful one. So, and the one thing I found was that the way we fight back against the stereotypes and the myths is by sharing our stories, which is exactly what you're doing. And that's kind of a very powerful thing because it's very hard to argue against someone's real experience. And I hope the more information we get out there and the more experiences we share, and the more normalized homeschooling will be in the world of
Yes, you're so
education.
right.
So let's just jump right
Valid is a
in.
great way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. So let's jump into your homeschooling experience since we're talking about homeschooling.
Yes.
Um, how did you first get started homeschooling? You mentioned you were at your public school. Was it last year that you were at public school?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have kind of a interesting homeschool story. So from kindergarten until 6th grade, I was in public school. And we had to quarantine for COVID
Hmm.
when I was in my 6th grade year of school. And after that year, so I was going to be going to 7th grade, my school, it was kind of weird. It was doing that hybrid program where kids would
Yeah.
be in some days of the week wearing masks, and other days they'd be completely remote on the computer for 8 hours a day. So I was having issues wearing the mask, it would give me migraines and everything.
Mm.
And I didn't really want to be sitting in a mask all day. And I definitely didn't want to be sitting on my computer for 6 hours just on Zoom.
Yeah.
So I tried it. I just didn't really like it.
Hmm.
But my mom was my parents decided that they were going to homeschool me and my siblings. So we homeschooled that year. We did a program. It's called The Good and the Beautiful. And we really liked it. It was a book, textbooks and everything.
Hmm.
So I homeschooled that year, but I don't know. After that year, I was I loved this so much. It was a great year, but I think I'm going to go back to school because things were starting to get more normal again. So I went back for 8th grade, had a good year, went back for 9th grade, which is high school. and I really did not like my high school. It's
Mm.
so run down. They're actually doing construction on it now. They're building a whole new school because it is so bad. It's from like the 50s, I think,
Wow.
and it had mold. It was like rotting, falling apart. And I just didn't really like the education I was getting. I was
Mm.
in all honors classes. I wasn't feeling challenged at all. I was never getting homework. And just a lot of the things I was seeing around me was very suspicious. Like, just like I would walk into the bathroom and people were doing crazy things that I just like didn't really want to be a part of or even near.
Mhm.
So after that year, and even during the summer, I completely, like, thought, like, I was going to go back to school for 10th grade. But then I went on, like, a pilgrimage kinda thing with my church to Spain and Portugal
Mm.
at the end of July and early August. And on this trip, I, like, felt a huge calling to homeschool, and it was something, like, I hadn't really thought about at all. Like, I knew I wasn't happy with my school system, but I never really saw myself going back to homeschool. So this was, like, super surprising, and when I got back from my trip, it was, like, 12th, and I was going back to school on, like, September 5th or something. So it was super last minute, and I hadn't given it any thought before, but when I brought this to my parents, they were like, "Yeah, like, we'll definitely think about it, and, like, we'd be okay with that. It's, like, really up to you, and we have to find a program that works for you." So we did a ton of research in such a short amount of time, and I gave it so much thought.
Mm.
Like, I was so close to going back to school. And even, like, when the public school, like, it was the first day of school, I still hadn't found a homeschool program yet. I just knew I, like, was not going to school. I wanted to homeschool. I just didn't know what I was gonna do yet.
Yeah.
But then I found Whitmore Online School shortly after, and I started with them, and I absolutely loved my program. It was awesome, like, I could do honors classes, and I just really had a great experience, and I am so happy that I homeschooled, and I plan to homeschool for the rest of my high school experience.
Wow. I love your homeschooling story. It's very unique because it was mostly you that, well, pretty much all you that instigated the whole I want to homeschool, and your parents came alongside you to help you. But that's very rare. A lot of times it is the parents who start the decision to homeschool, and then that, we just all follow them. But I love that it was a calling that you felt like the Lord placed on your heart, and you were brave enough to follow it, which I love so much about that. I had a quick question about the school that you use. What is it called again?
It's called Whitmore Online
Winmore.
School.
Okay. So, my question would be for anyone who had experienced the Zoom online COVID public school experience, what does that look like in comparison to like an online homeschooling program? Because I've noticed they're very different, but a lot of people assume they're kind of the same thing. So, what
Mhm.
has been the compare and contrast there?
Yeah, so I totally get what you're saying because I feel like when you hear online school, everyone is just like has PTSD to their Zoom
Yeah.
days on like during COVID. But for my school, so my sister did a different program. Only so I'm the oldest of six, and me and then the second child, we're
Hmm.
the ones who homeschooled this year. We did two different programs. She did Liberty University, which is like
Hmm.
pretty popular, and I
Yeah.
did Whitmore School Online. So how my program worked was it was 100% self-paced. And I still had to do like every single class. So like math, science, English, history, Spanish, and like I had to do fitness and like health. I had to do all the things.
Hmm.
But they only give you 3 courses at a time. So because they don't want people to get overwhelmed because it is a pretty challenging program.
Hmm.
So I had 3 courses at a time. You can pick, like, which courses you wanna start with, and for each course, you have a different teacher. So you can submit your lessons. I did my work 5 days a week, like a normal school day. So it took me about, I would say, 30 minutes to 2 hours, like, depending on the class,
Hmm.
like, for each course. So it's probably around, like it took me about 3 or 4 hours a day depending on the courses I had. And so you submit your work to your teacher, they get back to you, and it's a revision, like it's a mastery based program. So you have to get at least an 80 on an assignment to move forward.
Mm,
And if you're not happy with the 80, then you can revise it until you get to like a 90 or a 100, whatever you want. But they really want to make sure that you like 100% know and are confident in the lesson, which I absolutely loved because I felt like a lot in public school. Like, I wouldn't understand, say, a math lesson, but it's not like the teacher can pause and make sure I understood it
yeah.
before they moved on with the whole class because that's just not how it works. It couldn't work in public school. So I really liked that. And my teacher would give me a bunch of feedback. And then once I finished like the whole entire course, they would add a new course to my roster until I just finished for the summer, which
Mm.
was I really liked.
I love that mission, the mastery, like the vision of not, I guess it's
Mhm.
not a mission, but um that idea of mastery before you move on. I love that in homeschooling. I mean, pretty much no matter what program you use, you can usually do that, um, have that mindset. But online are very unique because usually, at least my experience with them, I have had like to submit something every week and move on, kind of like a regular pace of a normal class you would have at public school. So I like the
Yeah.
self-paced idea because that does allow you to lean in more to the mastery idea where you don't have to move on until you 100% know. And knowing is something deeper than just like acing a test. You know, you can totally memorize things and ace a test, but actually understanding and mastering a subject takes a little bit more time, which I love when programs honor that and every student is different. What did your friends from public school think whenever you decided to become a homeschooler?
Yeah, so I would say I I didn't really stay as close with a bunch of my
Mhm.
friends as I like would have liked, but I like they weren't really like completely strong friendships to begin with. Like some of my friends I'm still I still talk to all the time. I still see all the time, but also lost a bunch of friendships
Mm,
and it's not that I lost them, it's just they're not as strong as they used to be, which was definitely like partly on my part. I definitely could have been better about like organizing things and like hanging out with people, but friends are never really my top priority, if that makes sense. Like, I absolutely love my friends, but I just value family time so
mm,
much, and I just really, like, love being home and spending time with my family, so it's not really, like, on the top of my priority list, but I think it is super important to have friends and to hang out with them. But I also think that if you're the one who leaves, like, if I was like, I'm the one who homeschooled, it should be my responsibility to make the plans,
mm.
and I don't know, I wasn't very good at doing that.
You know, I like what you said that. And did you realize that early on in homeschooling, or is that something you figured out like as the year went on that it was your responsibility kind of to do that?
Well, so my mom had always said that. She was like, "You're
Mm,
gonna have to, like,
okay.
make all the plans." So I was very aware of that fact.
Yeah. Which is good. It's so important because I honestly didn't think about that until someone told me. Like, it's
Mhm.
actually your responsibility. And I think in your case, it was a little easier to notice because you were the one that instigated the homeschooling switch. But a lot of times, whenever you're homeschooled for a very long time, up through high school, we don't really have that perspective when it comes to friendships and pursuing friendships. So I see a lot of homeschoolers kind of get stuck because they don't
Mhm.
really take that responsibility. And it's not something you're going to be great at the beginning. I find that making plans with people is not necessarily my favorite thing to do in the world, but
Yeah.
I always end up having fun when I do it. Um,
I couldn't agree more.
mhm. So I think it's such an important thing. And it's also, I don't know if what you think about this, but I think it's an important skill to have, especially as we go into adulthood, because it is going to become solely our responsibility to manage our social
Mhm.
lives as adults. So I think that's a
Yeah,
good
I
thing.
totally agree. Especially when, like, it's not like you're at school every day, hanging out with your friends every day. You do have to, like, make the effort
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
hang out with people because you're not seeing them as much as you used to.
Hmm. Yeah. So what have been some of your biggest blessings you've experienced this year of homeschooling?
Yeah, so I would say a huge one is like being able to spend time with my family. I I'm the oldest and I never really like I obviously do get like one-on-one time with my mom,
Hmm.
but I like don't get as much as, like, I would like to because there are just so many kids and, like, I wouldn't trade that for anything, but it's just, like, the reality.
Mhm.
So I loved, like, having, like, every day, like, when my siblings went to school, it would just be me, my mom, my sister, and my little brother. So it was, like, so different because it was never us, like, alone with my mom,
Mhm.
which, like, I really liked. And I would say another huge thing is I definitely wouldn't have started my Instagram account if it
Mhm.
weren't for me homeschooling. Like, I A, wouldn't have had the time, and I don't think I would have had the confidence because I would still be seeing all my friends every single day and all the people from school. I would have to, like, face them every day and then go home, go on my Instagram stories in my bathrobe, and then go back to school the next day and
Yeah.
hear my voice playing on their phones. Like, they all follow me,
Mhm.
I would see it. I
Mhm.
couldn't.
Yeah. You know what? That's actually really funny because the other day, and this is totally off topic, but I was out somewhere and someone had asked me about my podcast, and I brought them a business card of mine. And they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, let me follow you right now." So they go on their phone and they look my podcast up, and then they start blasting my latest episode. And there's
Mhm.
like a group of people around, and I am so it's like the worst feeling. I I sit in my bedroom and I edit my voice, but I hate doing it. And then I'm like I can't listen to that again whenever I release.
Yep.
So
I
I totally
couldn't agree more.
sympathize.
Uh-huh. People at my work, like, I have a job,
Mhm.
and I was hoping people in my work would not find out about my Instagram, and they're
Mhm.
finding out, and, every time, like, someone mentions it to me, I'm so caught off guard. I,
Mhm.
like, literally die inside.
Yeah, I wish I was more confident in it because then I could be like, "Oh yeah, you should totally listen and whatever." But most of the time I'm like, "Please don't ask me about it because I don't want you to look it up."
Yeah, same.
Which
I
is not
freeze.
it's not great marketing. But it's like,
Mhm.
it's something I have to get over about myself. But that's really fun.
Yes.
And you know what? So you mentioned work. Has that been something you've been able to do more as a homeschooler as well?
Yeah, so I can actually, like, work a day shift, which my manager is very appreciative of
Mhm. Yeah.
because, like, I don't have to go to school. So I work 2 days a week, 9 to 3. Actually, it used to be 9 to 3 during my homeschool year, but it's been, like, 8 to 3 or 7 to 3
Mhm.
lately. So I only work 2 days a week because I tried working 3, and it was just too much with all my school,
Yeah.
especially if I'm working, like, all day. It's basically a full school day of work. So, I find that working 2 days a week works really well, and I kinda did my schoolwork around that. But school is
Yeah.
obviously my top priority right now.
And how has that working experience been? Do you feel like it benefits you, learning different skills?
Yeah, totally. And I work in, like, a little market, like, grocery store,
Mhm.
so I, like, love all the vegetables and the produce,
Yeah.
all of that stuff, and I think it's just great, like, talking to people and, like, getting out, talking to so many different people because I'm a cashier, so I see so many people every
Mhm.
day.
Yeah.
And I actually have something to share. So many people say, like, "Oh my gosh, like, are you in college?" And I'm like, "No, I'm homeschooled."
Mhm.
And they're like, "I was wondering why you were so good at talking to me." And, like, I was wondering why you were keeping such good eye contact. So, homeschoolers, listen up.
Yeah, I think I remember getting a few comments like that. "Oh, you must be like older than you look," or and I'm like, "No, actually, I'm homeschooled." And the same comments like, "Oh, you actually like look me in the eye." It's such a
Yes.
weird thing to get because you're always thinking people think you're more socially awkward, and then you kind of it's
Yep.
just it's an anomaly. Honestly, I'm so confused by it. Um every time it happens to me,
Mhm.
I'm like, "Ugh, aren't we supposed to be the weird ones? Like now we're not anymore."
I
It's
know.
but yet we still are. I don't know. It's and no matter what we do,
Mhm.
it just seems like it's almost impossible to overcome that stereotype. But
It's a tough situation.
yeah, it's interesting. But one thing
Yes.
I love about your talking about being
Mhm.
out in meeting different people and everything is well, there's actually two things. Just being out in the community during a regular school day is something that majority of teenagers don't do, which I think is such a valuable like that experience talking with other people, that experience working um, is something that we're not getting because we're in school for 8 hours every day. at least not in the way that you're getting it. So I think that has such a valuable place in this like new way of, or in this different way of doing education. And then also, I've gotten this a lot. I don't know if you've ever gotten it. Like, homeschooling must be an echo chamber. You must not ever talk with people who have different viewpoints, or you must never meet other people besides the people in your circle and your family. That's not really true, especially when you do
No.
things like that. So,
And I feel like being in a classroom all day, like, that is not a real world situation. Like,
exactly.
that is
Yeah.
not once you get out of school, it's, like, gonna be a culture shock. Like, it's not that's not how the world works. Like, you're supposed to be out engaging with other people, getting outside. You're not supposed to be sitting in a classroom every day under fluorescent lights,
Yep.
seeing the same people every single day. Like, that's just not how the world works. And I think like homeschool people are very privileged to have the chance to go out and see all these real world situations, like getting a job,
Hmm.
engaging with adults. I think it's super valuable.
Oh, there was another thing that you mentioned when we were talking about friendships, your time with your family and how valuable that is to you. I've heard this question also surface when talking about homeschooling. Worried about being around your family all day and like getting super annoyed and not having fun or whatever it may be. That just has
Mhm.
a negative connotation to a lot of teenagers. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Why do you love being with your family? And has that, have that ever been challenging for you? Or do you just, do you love it and it overcomes all that challenges? I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So I have a lot of like little siblings. They're
Hmm.
super wild and yelling all the time, which that I don't love.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do love just like I don't know, I love like just being there, like being in the kitchen and like being surrounded by the chaos. And I think it also helps that like 3 of my siblings go to school every day.
Hmm.
So like that's like I have like that time like to recoup and get my social battery back up before they come home. And
Hmm.
I just like but I never get sick of being around like my parents or like my little siblings because I don't know, it's just like they're my family. I'm so used to being around them and I love being around them.
Hmm.
And I also am not like the kind of person who like likes to be in their room all the time. I like to be downstairs or else I get like FOMO about what I'm missing out on.
I love that. There's something so special about growing that family bond. And have you seen it grow over this past year of homeschooling? Just you're closest with your parents or anything like that?
Yeah, I actually now that you say that, I definitely think so. Especially because like I have that alone time with my mom.
Hmm.
I think our like relationship has definitely like strengthened.
Yeah, it's whenever I ask people their favorite part about homeschooling, it usually is family closeness and being able to bond with their parents and their siblings more. That's been like the main thing. And you know what? On another topic of the school being kind of unnatural in a social setting, another thing is a lot of times with siblings, you're never really with them. Like maybe you see them in the morning and the evening, but that's
Okay.
pretty much all that you get with them. And I've one of my best parts about homeschooling, one of my favorite parts about homeschooling has been getting to know my sister. So I think had we been in a traditional school setting, I would have probably never had the relationship I have with her that I have now. How do you think homeschooling has shaped your view of education?
So I think like it's definitely shown me that education is not sitting in a classroom for 6 hours a day.
Mm.
Like that's not like that's a form of education, but that's not the definition of education. Education is like learning and building like your what do you call it? Like building your it's building like your intelligence and
Hmm.
shaping
Yeah.
like what you think. And I definitely think that like if a parent is looking for a completely like unbiased form of education, they should strongly consider homeschooling because like it allows children and teenagers to think for themselves, like, without having ideas and all these, like, ideologies pushed on them and, like, kind of force-fed to them. It kinda gives you a chance to, like, let the child or a teenager, like, think for themselves and shape their own opinions without having them shaped by other students or teachers or the curriculum.
Mhm. Yeah, I when you said the education wasn't like sitting in a classroom for 6 days, that's the definition of a school. Like I
Yes.
always thought education and school were the same thing. They're not. I think it was
Mm-mm.
Mark Twain. I think it was Mark Twain that said, "I'd never let my schooling get in the way of my education." I think that was his quote. But
Oh, that's
it's
cool.
yeah, it's a new idea for me. Like education is a different thing. School is just a way we do education.
Mhm.
And it's different. There's different ways of doing that, which is a brand new idea to me also when we started homeschooling, is that there's not just one path to follow. There's so many, and that can be based on, your students' needs or the pace at which they want to learn. There's so many things that factor into it, and it's a very exciting opportunity for us, especially as high schoolers, to like make those decisions for ourselves. And
Mhm.
you were talking about thinking, which is a really powerful thing. I heard a lot of people say this about homeschooling, or just the point of education should be teaching you how to think, not necessarily what to think. So you can have the right tools to think well. So when you're confronted with new ideas, and even, in your situation, when you're so passionate about clean living, healthy eating, like that's challenging something that's normal in our country is really not to think about that. And you've been able to challenge that, and challenge other people to change the way they think,
Mhm.
which is so powerful. One thing about an unbiased point of view, I think totally understand what you're saying about, you know, it opens the door for teenagers to really understand themselves without having peer pressure all the time, and it teaches us to think on our own too. But I think there's pretty much it's really hard to have an unbiased education. I think there's always a truth. I think especially as Christians, which I believe you're a Christian as well.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
Catholic.
Yes. So we have this truth that we outline our whole life around, which is the Bible, and that is the way we view the world is through that lens. And so I don't think it's sort of an unbiased necessarily, like that's the goal, but just to have a truth based education, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of indoctrination happening in the schools, which I think is what you're getting at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, I
So
totally agree.
that been something you've noticed about homeschooling is it's giving more time to like be in the word, and I don't know if that's something that you have seen
Yeah,
noticed.
definitely, because I don't know, I think a lot of, like, our society, they don't want people to, like, be religious and
Yeah.
believe in these things, and a lot of people these days aren't religious, like, and you can just see it by looking at the school. They don't have anything to, like, believe in and, like, look towards and, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
communicate with and believe in, and they just, like, seem so lost, and you can really see it, and I think just being surrounded by that, like, it slowly wears away at your own beliefs, and I think it's great, like, being homeschooled, you don't have to be surrounded by that.
Yes.
Like, once again, it gives you permission to think for yourselves
Mhm.
and, yeah, to absorb what you want to absorb.
You know what, this I feel like this goes really well into talking about your Instagram page, which you touched upon was started whenever you started homeschooling. So what's the story behind it?
When I first started homeschooling, actually, after COVID, so I was only in 7th grade, I started to have really
Mm.
bad gut issues and digestive issues. I was, like, constantly in so much pain, my stomach always hurt, I would be up multiple times a night, just, like, crying because my stomach hurt so bad, I was so nauseous. I always had migraines, and this was, like, such a shock. I hadn't changed my diet at all. I was, like, just eating the standard American diet like I always had,
Mhm.
but suddenly, like, my body was rejecting all of it, and I did, like, many tests and lab work, and I saw multiple doctors, and I was told that I had IBS and I would never be able to eat gluten and dairy again. Even eggs I could
Wow.
not have for a little bit. So I was, like, super shocked because gluten made up a huge part of my diet. Like, it was so comforting for me, especially when I felt so sick all the time. So I, like, started my gluten and dairy-free diet, and it was so hard at first,
Mhm.
but I started to feel so much better, and I was no longer waking up every night in severe pain, but, like, I would still get frequent stomach issues, and, like, I went to more doctors, and again, they told me, like, it was just IBS, and I would have, like, these flare-ups from time to time. And, like, I believed them and kinda learned to deal with it as best as I could, but being on my, like, gluten and dairy-free diet for a while, I started to see because, like, when you have allergies, you have to check all of the ingredients, like, you have to look
Yeah.
at every single ingredient label just, like, to be so careful. And looking at these ingredient labels,
Mhm.
I saw, like, a lot of these options that I was eating were, like, coincidentally healthier because they were, like, gluten and dairy free, they didn't have, like, all these, like,
Mhm.
inflammatory ingredients in them. So, I started to, like, look at ingredients and, like, look more into the products and, like, the brands and all their missions, and I started to hear a lot about holistic healing and gut health, and it was, like, around this time that I, like, started eating healthier and moving to, like, a more whole foods diet, like, filled with protein, healthy fats, fiber, that I really started to see, like, my symptoms go away. Like,
Mhm.
they weren't consistent the healthier I ate. And little by little, I started to feel so, so much better. And I started doing like tons of research on how the gut microbiome becomes damaged, like how to heal it, holistic living, all of that stuff that I talk about it on my page.
Mhm.
And in general, I found so many things that like the doctors never mentioned to me before. I
Mm.
heard about candida overgrowth, leaky gut, SIBO, and other gut issues that so many people have but don't know it. So like, although I didn't completely understand what was wrong with me, I knew that, like, my gut microbiome was off, and for that reason, I was having these crazy symptoms and, like, developed these food intolerances.
Mhm.
So, I started, like, making much healthier choices that would positively impact my gut, and I cut things out of my life that would damage it. So little by little, like my symptoms completely resolved. I
Wow.
started to feel like so good and like better than I ever felt in my life. I had so much energy and just felt like amazing. So I felt super inspired to start my account because Instagram had helped me a lot, like in learning and researching all of this. Because it kind of like I would see a video and it prompted me to start like thinking about a subject and doing research on it. So I was like, I want to do this too. Like I want to show people, specifically teenagers,
Mhm.
that they have all the tools they need to heal and like feel good. So that's kind of why I started my account. I started it in October of 2023. So that past October, it was when I was homeschooling. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
how I started my account.
And first of all, you've been like crushing Instagram, which I just love. You're up to 15,000? Is it 15,000 subscribers?
I hit 15,000 yesterday, yeah.
That is congratulations. That is
Thank
incredible.
you.
Um, so you're doing amazing in that. And I love the story. It is just I know every time I see a teen like see a niche that needs filled and then do the research and fill it, I feel like it's a homeschool mindset because it's really taking something and making it for yourself. So I love
Yeah.
that. And then you were so, you had such a life change experience that you wanted to share it and help others. And that's such a good part about social media, I feel like, that we don't talk about very much, is that it can be used in that way so positively to impact people. It can
Yeah.
also be used negatively, but there is that really cool way of reaching people that you've been doing.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree because I feel like obviously like there's so many negative things that come from
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
Like the comments, the videos, like there's definitely a dark side, but a lot of people like fixate on that and don't focus on like the good things that could come from it. Like the relationships you build and like inspiring others is
Hmm.
super important and impactful.
So we're going to talk about the response to your page in a minute, but I also want to talk about you mentioned being a crunchy teen a lot in your videos, and I
Oh yeah.
never heard that term used before. So, and I'm really new to all of this. Like my dad's been into gut biome for maybe a few months and he's been talking about it a lot. He just got us a book and he's like, "You need to read this." So, I'm like starting to get into
Oh.
it. But what does it mean to be a crunchy teen?
Yeah, I get asked this all the time, and it's
Yeah.
like one of my most common comments,
Mhm.
but I never really know how to answer it because it like kind of looks different for everyone.
Okay.
But like to me, I see it as like a teenager who lives like holistically and outside the norm,
Mhm.
or like kind of just someone who prioritizes their health and like does it in a way that is kind of opposite of the rest. Like it's not like a lot of like it's kind of going away from like what most people are doing, and I see it like have you ever heard of a crunchy mom?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so it's like that, but, like, I just call myself a crunchy teen
Crunchy
because
teen.
I'm not a mom.
No. Yeah,
Not
yeah.
yet.
It's kind of pursuing that alternate, like actually learning about the food you're eating, which I love. You talk about that. You actually were reading the ingredients and we're like, oh,
Mhm.
I don't know if all that stuff I can't pronounce is actually good
Yeah.
for me.
Oh, red 40? What's this doing in
Yeah.
my food?
One thing that I've kind of been overwhelmed when I kind of start getting into this whole idea of holistic living and challenging the food that we normally eat and switching um, to become to choose more healthier options. There we go. I've been kind of overwhelmed because there's so many different things that could potentially be changed. I mean, just food, but then you also sometimes talk about like your shampoo that you use or the toothpaste you use and all those things. So, how should we approach it without getting overwhelmed, especially as teens?
Yeah, I totally see, like, I feel like it is so overwhelming because there's so much information out there, but I recommend just, like, going back to the basics. That's I just started a podcast and
Mm-hmm.
I named it Becoming Basic because I just think it's kind of like the simplest way to approach this lifestyle without getting overwhelmed. Like just going back to the basics, like eating real foods, like single ingredient foods that will nourish your body instead of eating like all these processed snacks
Mm-hmm.
that has become so normalized in our country. Or doing things like making foods from scratch instead of like door dashing all your food. Like just doing things that our ancestors used to do and things that we were made to do. Like bringing up like the topic of religion again. Like God gave us all of these amazing foods to like nourish our bodies and completely thrive. And our country is completely like avoiding that fact. Like
Mm-hmm.
we have food grown here, like, that comes straight from the ground that we could be using, but instead we make ingredients in a lab and put them in our foods, like, literally poisoning people. So I recommend just, like, for starters, to add good things into your diet,
Mm-hmm.
like lots of fruits, vegetables, like animal fats, animal protein into your diet because soon like you'll start to feel so good and like subconsciously gravitate towards these things.
Mm-hmm.
And like the rest will come like things like your shampoo and conditioner and like your toothpaste. That will all come with time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like I don't know, letting it like work its way. Like don't freak out and throw everything in your house out.
Yeah,
Just take it slow.
it's not very economical either at this point.
No.
Yeah,
No.
but I would love for you to speak directly to teens because one thing I um, struggle with sometimes is just choosing the easier option versus actually like actively wanting to make my own lunch without just eating processed things and that
Mhm.
often can be the harder choice because it's not as convenient. So how have you found that even though sometimes it might be a little bit more inconvenient to make something on your own besides just getting a process or door dashing, what have been the benefits for you that have outweighed that, if you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
I
Yeah.
totally see what you're saying because I feel like, yeah, like fast food and frozen food, like that has become so normalized because
Hmm.
it's so convenient and it's so easy. But if you think about it, like things like I work on some days and I
Yeah.
just like, I still make it my priority to make my breakfast. Like I'll make eggs, they're so quick to make.
Hmm.
Or like some people like will make some ground beef on the stove. Like it's not that hard if you think
Yeah.
about it. Like it's really just like fitting it into your life, like making it a priority because like you do feel so much better. You have so much more energy. Your stomach feels so much better. Your
Mm,
skin looks way better. It's just like fitting it in there and doing it the first few times before like making it a habit. That's
yeah.
the hard part. But even, like, I like to meal plan a lot, like, in meal prep, and that makes it so much easier, like, making a batch of quinoa for the week, prepping, like,
Mm,
some smoothies that I can make in my, like, Ninja Creamy blender or whatever. Like or even, like, they do make healthier frozen foods, like Amy Lou, they have, like, these chicken meatballs, they're called, like, the brand is Amy Lou, and they're so
mhm,
good. And Kevin's is a brand that has, like, frozen food, Capello's, like, there are so many, like, frozen foods that are made with better choice ingredients,
mhm.
and you could even, like, freeze things yourself to, like, heat up
Yeah.
in the oven one day.
So, if for any of you guys who are interested in learning more about this, go follow Ava because you're constantly posting new things that you find that you love and that are great alternatives. I love watching your videos and everything. So it's a
Thank
great
you.
way to like stay up to date on all these new brands and everything because there's quite a few of them. And
Yeah, it's becoming so popular,
mhm,
like, just because I feel like more people are becoming aware about the
yeah.
ingredients and everything. Mhm,
So I was wondering, and this is going to be a shout out to Moana Adams' podcast, Making Waves,
mhm.
but you were just on her podcast and you were talking about this. And I remember something I loved what you talked about how you have found homeschooling is just it provides you that opportunity to make the food in a way that or make a healthy breakfast for yourself and lunch way that public school really didn't offer you that option. So I'd love to say like how does homeschooling fit into that like holistic lifestyle?
Yeah, so, first of all, you're not surrounded by, like, the mold toxicity in my old school or
Mhm.
everyone's perfumes. And second of all, like, you have so much more time to make your food. Like, before, I would just be, like, throwing random things in my lunchbox, making it work because I was
Mhm.
short on time and didn't feel like packing my lunch the night before. I would just have, like, a sandwich with, like, deli meat or whatever. But being homeschooled, like, I could actually make myself, like, an
Mm.
entire lunch or, like, an entire breakfast with, like, eggs and, like, I can make sourdough, like, I
Yeah.
don't know, it just gives you so much more time, and it makes it so much more convenient and possible to, like, eat this way, which I love.
Yeah. And you know what? Until you mentioned that, I never thought about that, that I have that privilege of being able to make my lunch every day and not
Yeah.
have to like, well, not, not only because you can do it if you plan ahead, but I'm just not good at
Yeah,
planning ahead.
exactly.
So it's just a little bit harder, but it is kind of something I've taken for granted for, I don't know, 8 years that I've been homeschooling is that opportunity. And I never thought about how the system of that is, public school has affected majority of American children's diets. Like it in a very interesting, I think that would be an interesting thing to look at, like to study a little bit more.
Yeah, I know. Now that you bring that up, it is, like, crazy. I actually love this podcast called The Spillover.
Mm,
And they had, someone on, it was months or maybe even a year ago. She like, her children were going to a private school,
yeah,
and she, like, took over the cafeteria, and she started, like, feeding everyone, like, roasted chicken, like, pasture-raised chicken from local
yeah,
farms, and it was just like, "Oh my gosh, that's so amazing, like, I wanna go to that school."
yeah.
And the kids, like, would go outside, and they would go, like, fishing, and they would get their own fish and cook it for lunch, like, it's so amazing.
Wow, that is
And, like,
so
that's, like
awesome.
but, like, people, like, literally, like, kids in public school are being fed food dye for lunch, like, bleached flour, and then the teachers and parents are wondering why their kids are so hyper,
Hmm.
like,
Yeah,
after lunch or after eating or just in general, because their diets are just filled with all the stuff that's supposed to make them hyper. It's
I
the
love the way
point.
that homeschooling fits into that kind of holistic lifestyle so well. Um, and you know
Mhm.
what? You brought up your podcast, so I think we have to touch upon that because you literally launched it today, which is just so awesome that
Yes, I did.
you're here on the podcast to talk about it. So, you mentioned the name, which you talked a little bit about the story behind it. So, what
Mhm.
do you hope to accomplish? Like, what is the mission of the podcast?
Yeah, so I plan on, like, I did a poll on my Instagram if like people wanted me to do mostly guests or mostly like solo episodes.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of gonna do a mixture of like solo episodes where I kind of like talk more about like my experience and like my opinion on subjects.
Yeah.
And then I also want to have like really cool guests on
Hmm.
to share their story, even share like their businesses on how they make like clean living more accessible and like tips they have for clean living and kind of just sharing their stories to like inspire people. Maybe I'll have to have you
Yeah.
on.
I would love to come and talk with you more.
Yes.
um, but you know what? I love that it's a teen's perspective because I do not see anything challenging teens to like eat better and just our way of living. I think that's such a great platform and such a great mission. So, and I know it's going to do well. I mean, like I said, me and Moana were talking about you earlier, and we're like, she needs to start a podcast because it's just
Thank
everyone loves
you.
your content so much, and so I think it's going to do great. And then what else?
Thanks.
Oh, you know what? You were doing a post recently about dealing with homeschool, but just hate comments in general, but specifically towards homeschoolers. So, how do you respond when people kind of are not that kind towards homeschooling and the idea of homeschooling?
Yeah. I usually don't
Okay.
because I
Yeah.
like usually don't really look at my comments anymore. Like when I first started getting them, like I wanted to see all of the comments and what everyone was saying about me. But now I just like I never really cared. I just it was more so like I wanted to see. But now I just kind of got sick of reading them because it's
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
same things. Like if you get like it's all the same things. Like people are hating on homeschool, my diet, what I look like it's all the same comments.
Hmm.
So or like it's just people responding to other people, so I'll have to like look back and read the whole thread. But
Mm.
I usually don't respond, and I actually made a video the other day about the homeschool haters because I feel like it is like we were saying earlier, homeschoolers are seen as like these socially awkward weirdos when in reality, people from public schools, not all people, but
Hmm.
a
Yeah.
lot of teenagers like can't even look anyone in the eye. They don't know what to do when they like go into a grocery store and see someone they know. They like put their head down, run away, hide because like they can't have a normal conversation with someone outside of school. It's like we were saying earlier, like they don't know how to interact in the real world. So I
Yeah.
just had to clap back, you know?
Yeah. Well, I like what you said about not really reading them because they have no like there's no reason why we should. And I've
Yeah.
gotten to that point now where I'm just like, you know what? Some people just do it to be like mean. They don't really even have a point to what they're saying. So
Yeah.
I like to answer the people who genuinely ask questions about homeschooling, even when they can come off a little bit offensive, because they really don't know. And I think that's
Mhm.
been majority of the time I get asked questions is it's genuine, like I don't understand what homeschooling is, and that's what we're trying to fix. But sometimes people
Yes.
just do it to kind of just be mean. And you know what? Both it goes both ways because I've met homeschoolers who are awkward. Like they exist out there, definitely. The
Yes.
same way that they exist in public school. The main thing is, as teens, we need to be active, like you said, and we need to take ownership of our social lives outside of school. Like, it doesn't matter what method of schooling we're using. Like, that can't be the center of our lives because it won't be forever. And that's what will make and break your homeschooling experience. And I have to say that you're such a great communicator. And I love listening to homeschoolers who just have this way of communicating because it just immediately dissolves that stereotype. And just as a side note, how do you think like that you've learned to be such a great communicator? Is it just with all your Instagram reels you've been posting? Do you think that's been helping you?
Honestly, like my dad,
Okay,
he's
yeah.
super talkative and I think he's like very social and like great at getting his point across and like
Mhm.
people always like want to talk to him.
Mhm.
So I would say it's like I wouldn't say like I wouldn't call myself like, "Oh my gosh, I'm such a good communicator," but
Well, you are.
I definitely learned I definitely learned a lot from my dad.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
And just
that's
like being on social media in general, like I have to engage with like a lot of brands and
yes.
followers. So it's super like beneficial and impactful.
Mhm. It's a very good skill to learn because no matter what job you do, you'll always have to be communicating, which I
Yes.
love that. I think we should stress it more and I wouldn't have learned it had I not started this podcast. I feel like that's been such a big blessing. So I wanted to know if that was somehow to do with Instagram, like you feel like you've gotten better at it. But
Yeah, totally.
yeah, so that's a good thing for us to think about. Just how can we practice communication?
Mhm.
And even, in your job too, that's a great way. So yeah. All right. Well, you know what? Before we end, I always finish with asking you what is your best piece of advice for other homeschoolers?
Yeah, I would say like my biggest piece of advice for homeschoolers is to just stay consistent and on top of your
Hmm.
schoolwork because it's a huge responsibility and it's your responsibility. Like in public school, you have teachers to hold you accountable, and obviously you have your parents in homeschool, but it kind of more falls into your lap and in your hands
Yeah.
because it's like your education. It's just you and you're kind of in control of it. So it's easy to fall behind or like be unmotivated, but you really have to stay consistent because it really matters
Yes.
and it's an important thing. Like it's your education and when it's your responsibility, like, I understand, like, it's easy to fall behind, but stay consistent. That's my biggest piece of advice.
Yes, that's definitely the one we need to hear the most because that is the hardest thing. One of the hardest things
Yes.
about being a homeschooler is self-motivation. So
Mhm.
keep the end in mind. And also, I think you have a very good understanding of how valuable education is. And I think learning that also is a very important part about staying consistent. It's like it's a blessing to be able to learn.
Yes.
So, and it's such an opportunity. I mean, from your learning about, your body and your gut health and everything, you've been able to really change your life in a more positive way, which is just so powerful. So anyway, thank you so much for sharing your story on the podcast and for talking with us about homeschooling and clean living. And just for everyone listening, if there's someone who wants to follow you or listen to your podcast, how can they reach you?
Yeah, so my Instagram is Clean Living with Ava. I'm not on TikTok. My YouTube is also Clean Living with Ava,
Mm.
but I don't really post about like on that much. And my new podcast is called Becoming Basic, and right now it's only on Spotify, but I plan to get it on Apple Podcasts soon.
Awesome. Yep.
So make sure to check it out.
Yes, and for all of you listening, I will link all of that in the show notes, so you can definitely go follow her podcast to keep up with everything Ava is doing. So again, thank you so much, Ava, for your time, and I hope you continue doing everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really loved talking with you about homeschool, and like I feel like we have a lot in common. So it was great to chat.